Hey everybody. Today we're going to discuss PIED piping. What does it do? And by the end of this video, you'll be able to walk away with a full understanding of what PIED piping is and how it works in syntax. We're going to discuss primarily two theories. I wouldn't dare say that they're competing. One is obviously a little bit better than the other, as you shall see later. But these are the two competing theories that explain PIED piping. But before we start, what is PIED piping? PIED piping is when you move, or PIED piping is when you move and you have something follow you. So here we have two examples. They asked who he was referring to. This sentence commonly used in informal English. As you can see, the who has been moved. Who originally should be here, but it moved to the specifier position, and it left the to stranding. This is not PIED piping. PIED piping, on the other hand, is what we can see in the second example here. They asked to whom he was referring. This sentence is more formal and used in formal English, and this time whom obviously originates here, but then it's been moved. But not only it moved, but it moved to with it. So to, the preposition to, has been PIED piped, followed whom when the movement happened. Why does this happen, and what are the rules that govern this sort of movement? This is what we're going to find out in this video. Before we move on, we're going to talk a little bit more about preposition stranding versus PIED piping. I'm going to just take the same examples I showed you earlier, and then we're going to look at them and scrutinize them to see what's happening. So let's look at the first sentence here. Informal English. Who was he referring to? P stranding is happening here. How does it happen? If you look at the derivation of the sentence, the blue font is for the category, syntactic categories and phrases. If it's bold, that means it's a maximal projection. If it's not, that means it's an intermediate or even a head category. So to who is the PPT, or sorry, not PPT, is the, because I am using a PPT today, so that's is the PP, or prepositional phrase. And then the derivation continues. This PP merges with the TP, and this PP merges with the TP, and then this TP goes to the intermediate projection of a C bar, and the C bar is headed by a C with a WH feature and an EPP feature. That means we'll extend the projection to a CP. Now we know that the CP will have to satisfy the WH feature here. That is, they will attract the closest WH head carrying a WH feature. In this case, the closest WH head carrying a WH feature is who. So this who will have to move and travel to the specifier position of the CP. And this is what actually happens. Now, in this scenario, we've left the to here, and it's been stranded. So this is the opposite of PIED piping. This is what is known as P stranding. So the P right now is stranded. In formal English, things are different, as I explained earlier. So the sentence we've seen earlier was to whom was he referring, and there is nothing stranded. Let's look at the sentence. It's pretty much the same derivation. Now the CP here, the WH feature here, triggers the CP to attract its closest WH carrying head, but this time the whole PP is targeted. As you can see here, it turned red. Not just the who inside the PP, but the whole PP is targeted, and the whole PP moves and does a twirly whirly right over there to the specifier position, and you end up with to whom he was referring. So this is known as PP PIED piping, or the PP has been PIED piped. So WH movement may target the WH word alone or a larger phrase containing it, as you can see. Now the problem here is why is this happening? And for syntax, especially minimalist syntax, everything needs to be economical. That is to say, we need a set of rules that are finite that would explain how things work. There is no room for randomness. That's pretty much what the idea is. Okay, we have some initial assumptions that we need to make before we dive into the two theories that we're going to discuss to explain this phenomena of PIED piping. The first one being the C, or contains the WH and the EPP feature, will attract the closest WH bearing constituent. As we saw in the two previous examples, the landing site of this attracted constituent will be the specifier of the CP, as we saw. And the last one is only maximal projections occupy specifier positions. So I need to extract a maximal projection. I can't take the specifier and then put it onto the specifier of the whole phrase. Now, the question that we still haven't answered with only these assumptions is, how does the PP to whom become eligible? It's only whom that should be eligible. Whom is obviously a WH word. It's in the name WH word. But why to? To is not WH word. To is a preposition. Okay. So let's look at how the preposition stranding derivation happens, and I'm going to try to establish what's going to happen here with the tree diagram that I'm going to draw. So this is the tree diagram, or this is what I'm going to show. The end result of the tree diagrams would be who he was referring to, with the who moving to the specifier position and the to being stranded, staying behind. Okay, so let me do this very quickly. So we have the who. I'm just going to call it noun phrase, or it could be pronoun, but it is going to be a noun, so I'm going to call it noun phrase. The who is at the same level as the preposition, and both of them are merging to get us a PP. So this PP in turn merges with the VP, the lexic verb, headed by the verb referring, and this VP in turn merges with a T bar, and the T bar is headed by a T, and here we have the auxiliary verb was. This in turn merges with a TP, which is headed by a pronoun in its specifier position, and that pronoun is he. So far we have he was referring to whom, but here's where all the funny things start to happen. Now the C here, since this is an interrogative question, will be headed by a C, and the auxiliary, this will have a strong interrogative feature, so the was will move to here. And then if we move on, if we continue, I hope my face is not covering anything, by the way. I just realized that maybe I should have left some room, otherwise my face will be covering things. Let me check very quickly if my face is covering things. Okay, I'm back. I don't know if my face is covering anything or not, but I made it smaller, so it's not gonna cover anything. I can't see because the video is still recording, and I'll need to stop it if I want to check. Okay, let me continue with this derivation. I don't know, I think it's not going to be covering anything. Well, let's hope, fingers crossed. So we move on to the CP. Therefore, the specifier position needs to attract the closest W bearing head onto it. In this scenario, who is the closest WH bearing head? So this who will move from this position all the way. I can draw a straight line very well to here. Who? Okay, it's a little bit messy, but I think you get the idea. Who was he referring to? The final derivation, let me use another color to make it clearer. The final derivation is who was he referring to? With the two over here, the arrows point to the wrong direction. The two over here is stranded. All right, so this is what happens. Now, how do we explain this, or how do we explain when it moves and when it doesn't move? As I said, we have two analyses. The first analysis is known as feature copying or feature percolation. It either it copies or it spreads, which kind of means the same thing in this case, but this is how you will find this proposition in the literature: feature copying or feature percolation. Now, what do we mean by feature copying? We usually have a WH word, and that WH word has a WH feature, as we can see here. This is the WH feature. It belongs to whom. Now, with feature copying or percolation, what would happen is this WH feature will be copied, like another copy will be made of it, and this copy will spread to the adjacent constituent too. So now we have the original WH constituent carrying the WH feature. Now it's spread, it becomes kind of contagious, and it goes to the to. Now both of them carry a WH feature, to and whom. Therefore, when the specifier position is attracting something to land in that position to satisfy the WH feature that exists in the C head, it will attract both of them. All right, it will attract both of them. So the P merges with the WH complement, as you can see here. It merges with a WH complement. P inherits a WH feature, and the PP, the whole PP, prepositional phrase, becomes WH marked. Here we have the example of formal English where pied piping happens, and just like we did with the previous one, let's try and draw the tree for this one. Okay, I know that my head is around this area, so I'm going to try and stay clear of that. I'm going to start here maybe. So I'm going to just call it an MP again for the whom. So MP merges obviously with the PP headed by the P2, the PP, and then merges. It's quite similar to the previous one with the VP headed by V with the word referring, with the lexical verb referring. Then we go on to the T bar, which is headed by a T, and the auxiliary verb was. We move on to the TP, which is headed, or not headed, which has in a specifier position the spec or pronoun. You can either, is fine, but the idea is we can have the pronoun he in here. And then we move on to the C bar, which is headed by a C, and this will be moved to here because it's a question. And then the CP headed by a specifier, and because of the WH feature we'll be looking at where is the WH feature carrying maximal projection. It used to be just whom, but because we've had we've had P merges with a WH complement, P inherits WH feature, and PP becomes WH marked, the whole thing now moves. So to whom, both of them will move, and then here we'll have to whom. And what moved here actually is the whole prepositional phrase. So this is how pied piping happens, and this is how we can draw a tree diagram for pied piped sentences. So larger movement is possible because the larger phrase becomes WH eligible. This is pretty much what feature percolation or feature copying is. Now, why is this initially considered as an attractive account? Because it's doing looks maxing? No, not because of that. It is regarded as an attractive account because it directly deals with pied piping. It doesn't deal with anything else. According to the literature, again, it preserves the WH head-based attraction, which means if the head has a WH feature like WH words, they will be attracted to the specifier position. Internal feature transmission explains larger movement. The fact that the features spread, they will explain the movement that happens on a larger scale. Now, what the problems that will show up with this will be if we're saying this, the feature just spreads like that, why does it stop spreading? Why can it not keep spreading? And when does it stop spreading? When does it know that it needs to stop? And when does it know that it can continue? And to what extent can it continue? Can it keep going on forever, like I am going on forever about this point? But anyways, look at this. Which province? Okay, simple. Which has been moved from some position that will be later in the sentence to the beginning. Which province? This is a simple WH movement. Of which province? Now you can say that which has moved, and pied piping happened. The WH feature in which spread to whatever was next to it. In this case, it was the preposition of, and both of them now have been moved to the specifier position. Of which province? Well, guess what? It can keep going. Capital of which province? Now the WH feature spread to the PP, and then it spread to the noun phrase as well. The capital of which province? It can keep going again. So the capital of which province? Now it's spread to the PP, to the NP, and then to the DP. Again, you see what the issue is now. It just keeps on going. In the capital of which province? PP, NP, DP, and embedded in another PP. We've done a full Ora Bora serpent thing. Now, as you can see, you can already spot what the issues with this proposition would be. Feature proliferation. We don't know when it's going to stop. Overgeneralization. Kind of the same thing here. How we are overgeneralized. It's just, well, the W feature just spreads. This is kind of a big overgeneralizing. Spreads to what? When does it stop? Are there any restrictions? There are no restrictions in the feature copying or percolation proposal. And then you have specifier problems. You have WH words that occupy the specifier position, so they're not really heads to be able to spread their feature. They're in the specifier position. In sentences like whose car, whose is obviously not a head in this case. So how do you explain that it spreads its feature? Or in another example, how many cars? Obviously how many is not the head here, so how do you explain that it's spreading its feature? So all of these 3 points that I've mentioned are what is used to critique this kind of a proposition to explain pied piping. Moving on to analysis number 2, Chomsky's convergence account. This is a better account, and it is true to the principles of the minimalist syntax, which is we want something to be simple, finite, with robust accounts or generalizations that can be made. First, we need to look at this principle as it is mentioned per verbatim in the textbooks. A head attracting F attracts the smallest accessible constituent containing F, whose movement yields a convergent derivation. In plain language, what this means is So the C has an EPP feature, extended projection principal feature, as well as a WH feature. That head attracts the WH carrying feature, in this case WH word, to the specifier position of the CP. So that attraction or that operation needs to yield a convergent derivation. What does that mean? Convergent means grammatical, acceptable. That's pretty much what it is. So whatever we attract, what we need to end up with is a derivation that is accepted and grammatical, which means if we attract the smallest constituent, which is just the WH word itself, and we have it land in the specifier position and that sentence is not grammatical, then we move on and we enlarge the attraction pool to include the elements that is right next to it. And that's when pied piping happens. And then we move that. And if the sentence is satisfied, we don't go further. If the sentence is grammatical, we don't go further. If the sentence is ungrammatical or crashes in minimalist syntax terms, then we need to expand that scope once again. Okay, let's look at examples for this. So the process would look like this. You will move the smallest constituent containing the WH element that yields a well-formed result, as I just explained. Pied piping arises when movements of a smaller constituents crashes. If I move the smallest one in the sentence is considered or deemed ungrammatical, then the derivation crashes. I need to spread the feature if you want to use feature percolation terms, or I need to pied pipe the element that is next to it to land in the specifier position. All right, so let's look at this example here, and we'll look at two candidates. The first candidate is we don't pied pipe, we just move the WH word, and the second candidate will be when we pied pipe, and why one would fail and what the other one would succeed. So candidate number one, we're going to target only which. First, just to understand this sentence, so the red element is the WH or pied piping movements that's going to happen. The green one is another movement that happens because of other syntactic rules, such as the head-to-head movement. The T have moved to the head of the C, or to the head of the CP, which is the C. So candidate number one is which. It's too small and it will crash, and it cannot specify the specifier requirements. As we said, in the specifier position, we will need to attract, which is not the maximum projection. We need to attract a maximum projection to land in the CP, in the spec CP position. Anyways, let's look at candidate number two. Candidate number two, if we attract the maximal projection, which assignment? Maximal projection, so it will satisfy the specifier requirement, and it is convergent. If I say which assignment have you done, it is grammatical. So the grammar selects the smallest structurally constituent. Here in this case, grammatical correct, acceptable. Stranding versus pied piping under convergence. Let's look at the examples we've seen at the beginning, and let's see how this comparison would hold up. Now, in formal English, the smallest movable constituent is who? This is in informal English, so double the in there. In informal English, the P stranding is allowed under informal English rules. Who was he referring to is acceptable. In formal English, on the other hand, stranding constraints blocks home alone. Next smallest movable constituent would be the PP. Therefore, we move the PP and we have to whom was he referring. So different constraints would yield different movement sizes. Now, the constraints themselves, there are three that we need to know of that happen in pied piping that govern how pied piping works, at least in English, as you'll see. The first one is what is known as the left branching condition, or LBC. In English, the leftmost constituent of a nominal, adjectival, or adverbial expression cannot be extracted out of that expression. We will see with the examples that are going to follow that this constraint holds. Now, look at this sentence here. We have a nominal phrase here, whose girlfriend. So the leftmost constituent of this nominal phrase is whose, and we've extracted it to move and satisfy the WH feature. Because it is the leftmost constituent of a nominal phrase, this movement is not acceptable and the sentence yields an ungrammatical result. In the second example, we have pretty much the same thing. We have another DP here, and its leftmost element is the WH constituent, which we've moved it to the CP. Again, the derivation crashes. It will not work. Here we have an adverb phrase with how. As you can see here, we have our degree phrase, and the leftmost element of the degree phrase is how. And because we've moved it from the leftmost position of an adverbial phrase, the derivation again is deemed ungrammatical. Another one here with an adverbial phrase or an adverbial expression. How independently of you. We've extracted the how, moved it to the CP. Again, it fails because it is the leftmost constituent of an expression. So the LBC, or the left branching condition, blocks extraction of small left edge WH element from a larger phrase. Constraint number 2 is what is known as the complement extraction domain. This one is simpler to understand. Only complements permit extraction specifiers and adjuncts, or adjuncts do not. So when you want to extract something, in this case a WH constituent, you can only do it from a complement. You cannot do it from a specifier or an adjunct constituent, okay, or elements in the phrase or in the sentence. But the first example is well formed because it does not violate this. So let's look at this. Who was he taking pictures of? Now, if you look at the DP, the noun of taking pictures of, pictures of who? Pictures of who in this case is the complement of the inside the VP phrase. The V is taking and pictures of is the complement. Because this is a complement, extraction is possible. So you can extract who and you'll end up with who was he taking pictures of. Fine, no issues at all. Well, what happens when we extract from things that are not complements, either specifiers or adjuncts? What has part of has broken? So it's even hard to understand what it says. I think I have a double has here because we have moved one, so we don't need this one. This one should not be here. Okay, so we've moved this has to this position. So this one was just a mistake from my side. All right, sorry. Good. So let's continue. So in this scenario, what we are extracting from is what. So we're extracting the what from this DP, part of what. This DP is in the specifier position of the TP. I repeat, look, it's not in the complement of the TP or the complements of the VP. It's in the specifier position of the TP. The TP itself is part of what has broken. So because we're extracting the WH word from a specifier position, as you can see here, of the TP, the derivation crashes. It's not gonna work out because we can only extract from complements, not specifiers. In the next example here, we have what inside a CP that is an adjunct CP. Because it is an adjunct and not a complement, again, when extracting the WH word to go and satisfy the WH feature on the head C by landing on the spec of the CP, we have the same issue. The derivation crashes because it is not extracted from a complement position. It is an adjunct position. So far we've seen two constraints. We're going to move on to the third one. Third one is known as the functional head constraint. This one is even simpler than the previous two. So a functional head is something that is like the head of a DP. So DPs are considered functional phrases headed by a functional head, or the articles in English pretty much. So let's look at this sentence here. A picture of whose mother. So far it's fine. So we're gonna try and do two movements here. We're gonna try and move the complement of the functional head, and we're gonna see what's gonna happen. So if you move the complement, so this is the sentence as we had it before, a picture of whose mother. So we're only gonna take the NP, the complement of the head D, or the functional head, and then we're gonna move it. We end up with picture of whose mother because we left the stranding, right? Stranded. It doesn't work. However, if we include the whole thing, remember the Chomsky's analysis where he said you need to move the smallest constituent that would yield a grammatical sentence. If we do that, we will move to the bigger category and we're going to include the functional head. And if we include the functional head, we'll end up with the movements that will target the whole DP, picture of whose mother. In this case, it's fine. The sentence will not crash. Now, if you've been following, I know this is maybe confusing. This will probably clarify everything that you've missed so far. First of all, congratulations if you made it this far. It means you really care, you want to learn this stuff. You must be crazy, okay? Just like myself. But this one I like the most because we will see all the constraints being used and how the derivation will eventually yield the correct sentence and how it will crash if we don't follow the convergence principle as said by Chomsky. Anyways, this is a very long sentence. A picture of whose mother had you thought was on the mantelpiece. Now, it is correct and it should be derived in this way. Why? If we look at the sentence without any movements, what we should have is you had thought a picture of whose mother was on the mantelpiece. This is without any movement. But what we're targeting here is the whose. So whose, the WH feature. This C will attract the whose, and it would want to put it right here where the arrow is pointing. So obviously we're going to start with the smallest and following Chomsky. If that works, great. If it doesn't, we need to move on and move something that is larger. So the first thing we're going to target is the whose. This is whose, and if we use this, we will end up, if we use this whose and we move it to here, you will end up with whose you have thought a picture of mother was on the mantelpiece. Makes no sense. Why does it make no sense? Because we're violating two of the constraints that we've mentioned so far. The left branching constraint and the complement extraction domain. Why? All right, look at this DP, whose mother. For this DP, this is the leftmost constituent inside this DP. And according to the left branching condition or constraint, we cannot extract something that is in this position, that is in the leftmost or the edge of the nominal phrase in this scenario. We're also violating the complement extraction domain. Is this a complement? Is this a complement? It is not. It is not in the complement position. So we're also violating that. Okay, so because we violated these two conditions or these two constraints, we cannot make the movement happen. What are we going to do then? We're going to try and expand the moving phrase to include the bigger category. What if we target the whole DP in this scenario? Whose mother? Now, whose mother cannot give us a correct sentence if we move it here. Let's try. Whose mother you had a picture of was on the mantelpiece. Still makes no sense. Why is it making no sense? Because it's violating the complement extraction domain. So, whose mother was on the mantelpiece? This sentence is pretty much in the specifier position. It's not in the complement position. Whose mother, it's almost like the subject of this. It is the subject of this smaller phrase. Whose mother was on the mantelpiece. So it's not a complement, therefore it cannot be extracted. What do? We expand the category. What if we take the of with us? What if we take the PP now? The sentence will be then, of whose mother you had thought a picture was on the mantelpiece. Still unacceptable and ungrammatical. Why? Same reason. It is not in a complement position, and I'll let you see this for yourself. As you can see, it is still in the specifier position for this smaller TP here. Okay, moving on to a larger phrase here. If we take picture of whose mother, so we'll end up with picture of whose mother you have thought was on the mantelpiece. Picture of whose mother you have thought was on the mantelpiece. We cannot do it. Two reasons. We're still not extracting from a complement position. In addition to that, we're violating the third constraint, the functional head constraint. Is a functional head, and we cannot take its complement away from itself. Now, the last option is the DP, picture of whose mother. If we move this, we'll end up with a picture of whose mother you had thought was on the mantelpiece. And finally, this is convergent. This is correct. So as you can see, the WH feature here, well, I don't want to say copied because that's, but we kept expanding what would be considered the maximal projection carrying the WH feature to include the whole DP. First, just the who's in the specifier position here, then the whole DP here. But this whole DP was the specifier or the subject of this sentence. We kept expanding it. It's still not a complement. Eventually, we reached the NP picture of whose mother, but that excluded the functional head. So we've violated the complement extraction domain as well as the functional head constraint. Eventually, we included and then all of a sudden, this sentence is a complement as well as the functional constraint. The functional head constraint was not violated. Okay, I hope this was clear. All right, we're almost done. I know it's so much. I myself is getting tired of talking about this, so I cannot imagine how you guys must be feeling looking at all of this. But yeah, I hope this is of some use nonetheless. Anyways, so the bottom line is the smallest convergent constituent in this scenario is the DP, a picture of whose mother, and that's what we're going to move to the CP to satisfy the WH feature on the C. Now, percolation versus convergence. Which one is better? For feature copying, which means percolation, larger phrases move because its head becomes WH marked. This is a bit of a summary. I think this is the last thing we're going to look at, so hang in there. Good for basic PP and PP pied piping, like the two whom only PP pied piping. the moment you start expanding it, then you run into the issues we've discussed earlier. Those issues are basically, it is invisible, it's not strong theoretically, and it's pretty much doesn't work on specified cases. Convergence, the Chomsky stuff we've talked about. Larger phrases move because smaller candidates crash, just like we've seen in the previous example. Derives PIED piping from independent constraints. The three constraints that we've discussed exist on their own, but if we use them to discuss convergence for PIED piping, then it is more economic in terms of minimalism in the theory. Yeah, that's exactly what I just said. May require cross-linguistic refinement. Now, this is all based on English and English examples. There are languages, if you've read the textbook in the chapter, you'll see that they talk about Polish, for example, which has a different sets of parameterized variations and additional mechanisms. So the PIED piping realm is still needs some work to be done on it. So yeah, it's strong, it's good, but we've only tested it on English. When tested it on other languages, things become a little bit fuzzier. Well, guess what? That is the end of this video. If you like this video, you want me to do more, make sure to subscribe, comment, let me know in the comments what topic you want me to talk about next, and share with your friends, with classmates and all of that. Seeing the numbers of subscribers going up is definitely something that would motivate me to do more and hopefully help everybody get through this stuff. That's it, and I'll see you next time.